This is a panel about privacy and fungibility and anonymity. So now we're going to turn off the lights and you will just hear. No, I'm joking. No, you can see these people talking about these topics. And I will leave the mic to Mir, who will introduce the guest. After this, we will have the lunch break. And after the break, we will have the actual demos about these very important topics. This is something, I mean, Bitcoin users are very used to hear things about key management, security, but privacy and fungibility is something that is mostly perceived by non-technical users as someone else's problem. And what we want to communicate here is that these are not secondary issues. These are basically the core issues of actually using Bitcoin. So, Mir, to you.
So, thank you very much, Giacomo, because once again, this was kind of my introduction and you steal it. But yes, let's start. And this time again, I have the panel before lunch. And so we'll try to keep it short, but I think the topics are very important. I was very excited to moderate this panel because I think privacy and fungibility are so important to address. And I was like, oh yeah, privacy is so great as human right and whatever. And then I thought, but what about fungibility? And then I understood that is always linked, is very important, that a Bitcoin is equal to another Bitcoin from an economic point of view. So this panel will be about obscurity, anonymity, and in some way ignorance in the right way. We are going to address why these topics are important, what are the tools we have to use to reach these goals. And I think that many users are now used to secure the keys. As we talked yesterday, they are starting to run full validating node. But they still don't get why it's so important to have and to use the tools for Bitcoin to be private and fungible. So, and use coin join transactions in general. First question, very easy. Who are you? What are you working on? Where are you from? And why do you think we put you in this specific panel?
Hi, my name's Adam Gibson. I work mostly on Join Market, which is a coin join implementation, but I also do a lot of sort of documentation, research of different privacy technologies.
Hi, I'm Nopera73, going with that handle online, and I'm a .NET developer and a Windows fanboy. And I'm working on Wasabi Wallet, which is doing coin joins.
Hi, I'm Jonas Nick. I'm from Earth. I work at the Blockstream Research Group, mostly on future improvements in the Bitcoin protocol. I would like to see that improve privacy, like Schnorr signatures and Taproot.
Okay, perfect. You can skip my question about why we put you in this panel, but we can imagine why, and we can arrive about it later. I want to say that after the panel there are going to be the demo from Adam Gibson about Join Market, Wasabi Wallet by Nopara, and Jonas, you already saw him yesterday. There are going to be a presentation about APS by Chris Belcher. So, first question, very, very open. Why do you think privacy is so important for Bitcoin? Many times happened to me that people were just like, oh, the fact that Bitcoin is transparent could be a feature. It's so beautiful that we have a blockchain that can in some way help us to trace who are doing transaction, or especially people that are not so interested in Bitcoin. But sometimes the fact that Bitcoin is a pseudo-anonymous could be seen just like a feature. So what are your thoughts about?
So I don't overcomplicate it. Fungibility is an essential property of good money, and by improving privacy, we are improving fungibility. So it's in the specification that we have to build good money. We have to build the money that's fungible. So we might want to work towards that direction.
I totally agree with that answer, but I do have another answer, which is because we're dealing with a bearer instrument. It's a very much higher security bar. So even if for some reason or other you're fine with everyone knowing all your business, and in fact nobody is, still for security reasons you really need privacy so that people don't know where your money is, how much money you're moving around, and so that's another reason, but Adam's reason is the fundamental one.
And maybe it should be noted that Bitcoin can be transparent as long as the holders of the coins want to disclose it to the world, what they are doing with their transactions. So you can have, ideally you would have both privacy by default, but optional, transparent to the world.
I think that's a very important point. So we can choose how private we want to have our transaction. So, but can we just use some altcoins? Why are we focusing once again on Bitcoin? There are altcoins that are almost private and even better probably than Bitcoin.
So we can rebuild the internet from scratch, and we can surely build a much better internet with much better properties. But that's just not how the world works.
Yeah. Also, there are trade-offs, and you know, we have a lot of noise in this space. So we look at things like Zcash and Monero, and we see them advertising with some basis much more advanced privacy properties, but they do so at a price. And the example I like to give is DigiCash, which had an information theoretic perfect privacy. So the actual exchange of notes, you don't know where the notes came from. But unfortunately, the trade-off there was this massive centralization, which resulted in a complete collapse. And that's only one kind of trade-off. There's space trade-offs, there's computation trade-offs, trusted setup trade-offs. So just be cautious in thinking that, you know, the grass is always greener on the other side, right?
So let's talk about fungibility. Can we just have Bitcoin that are more important than other? For example, a Bitcoin that is just fresh mined, or a Bitcoin passed through an important personality, just like maybe Julian Assange, or something dangerous, just like a Bitcoin passed through Silk Road in the past, or whatever. Don't you think that could be a great idea? These are typical objections.
Do you hear that? People actually say that to you?
Absolutely. Yeah, in some way. Well, articulated
but
a little bit too much, but yes,
sure,
it happened to me because, guys, in my previous job, I talked to many different people from many different fields. So the objections were very, very creative.
Okay, so it's a trap, and I'm walking into that. But yes, some Bitcoins are more equal than others, and it's just a design flaw.
It's a design flaw, okay.
Well, but let's observe that although there's talk about it endlessly for years, we don't actually see markets like that, right? There aren't actually markets for different kinds of coins, and I think that's quite revealing because, you know, economic incentives were very powerful. If the simplistic analysis that, let's say, a freshly mined coin is more valuable were correct, then we would see it, but we don't, because there is actual fungibility. The thing is, fungibility is this is a very controversial point, but a lot of people, for example, Monero advocates will say fungibility is binary. It's either fungible or it isn't, you idiot. And I just totally reject it. I mean, there was a time, for example, in the Greek crisis when Greek euro banknotes were trading for less than German euro banknotes, and that's kind of ridiculous because fundamentally the fungibility of euros is guaranteed by government edicts, right? But so that's what the reason I quote that example is it shows that something can be actually fungible, but there can also be grey areas, and I think there are grey areas in fungibility. But as of yet, we don't have some kind of different market for Silk Road coins, so that's.
Yeah, I think it's not only that coins are either fungible or not, it's even that they change over time, both in terms of the technical improvements that happen and better software, but also how people use it. And I think it's very wrong to just think that this is Bitcoin, it's not fungible, and it will always stay that way. I think we can work on making it much better than it is right now.
So from theory to practice, what do you think are the strategies that can help Bitcoin right now to be more fungible and more private? I mean, individually as a private person and systematically.
Funny you mentioned that because I've got a list. It's funny how that happens. Yeah, so the obvious one that always gets mentioned first is address reuse. So what I'm saying here is what should you do as an ordinary Bitcoin user? So address reuse. If your wallet has address reuse, just ditch it immediately, right? Find another wallet. One that people don't often mention, but which is really interesting, is separate profiles. So many wallets have a feature called accounts based on BIP32. Maybe that's not the important point. The important point is you can separate your coins into different areas such that they don't get mixed together when you make transactions. So you can use separate accounts to help. For example, you could have a work profile and a home profile. Or, I don't know. For example, what else? Peer-to-peer trade. Another one that isn't often mentioned in the context of privacy is. It's greatly helpful for our ecosystem as a whole if people engage in trade directly without going through counterparties, middlemen. So it could be exchanging your Bitcoin for euros. It could be just buying stuff. It could be buying digital stuff like buying VPNs. If you can do these things without going through a middleman, you're probably doing a huge amount to improve Bitcoin's privacy as a whole ecosystem, because that doesn't get... Of course, chain analysis is still applied to it, but it's not as effective. It's a lot less effective without all the KYC endpoints and the businesses. So think about doing peer-to-peer trade. What else? Use your own full node. It's very good for security, and it allows you, as was discussed at length yesterday, to validate properly that you're on the right Bitcoin network. But it's also excellent for privacy. For example, broadcasting transactions is rather troublesome from a privacy point of view, but if you're downloading all the transactions and broadcasting all the transactions anyway, well, it's a lot less problematic. There are other, also that are connected to running Bitcoin itself, Bitcoin Core. You should also try to convince yourself to actually use Tor. I know a lot of people find it's a little bit kind of scary, Tor. Ooh, it's gotten a lot easier over the years to use, and it's a really powerful tool. Like, for example, right now I'm hooked up to my home node on my Join Market wallet, and Tor enables that using hidden services, and it's good privacy. What else? CoinJoin. Use CoinJoin transactions. I mean, both of us are going to give demos, and there'll be lots of discussion about CoinJoin shortly. But use CoinJoin. It's great. And I've written here avoid servers. I'm not sure what I was thinking about there, but avoid servers. Yeah, it's good advice. And lastly, start using Lightning Network for your day-to-day transactions, because that's going to be really a big step up. Yeah.
That's a good list.
Well, I'm kind of scared after all this list, because I have to do so many things.
You mean you're not doing all that already? Mir,
Yeah,
I thought we were
yes,
friends,
of course,
Mir. I
yeah.
thought we were
Yes,
friends.
we're friends. Of course, I'm not. So now, as the question I'm asking you guys, but I want to understand if it is in some way feasible to have Bitcoin private and fungible, even for a non-tech user, non-super tech guys. What can do a person? What could be the start of this journey through privacy?
So I in some way disagree with Adam, because he's right that you have to have a comprehensive strategy, but that has to be consistent and you don't have to do everything all at once. And with Wasabi, we actually provide a comprehensive user experience for privacy-centric users. So we pay attention to everything, to the network level privacy, to how we broadcast transactions, to ship with Tor. You don't even know you are using Tor, except that it says on the bottom, but never mind. So it's not that hard with Wasabi, and that was my goal. And I think we already achieved it, and what we have to improve is the convenience of privacy, the speed of getting your coins mixed, and the cost, because blockchains don't scale, and these things are using a lot of block space.
I think the first step would be just to do some research and look into what wallets actually value privacy. So the default option would be to run your own full node, but there are also other options out there. For example, Wasabi.
Exactly. Do you want to talk a little bit about your specific project, Join Market and Wasabi, and what are you working on in Blockstream about this topic?
So Join Market, it's probably good that I get a chance to give a short description here, because the demo I'll be clacking on keys and just at very high level. It's started I guess early 2015, and the idea of it was to have a kind of economic incentive to solve the problem of making coin join possible between arbitrary people out in the world who don't know each other. So some people come into Join Market and they offer coins to do coin joins with, and they get paid very small fees for each coin join they do. And other people come and they just actually want to do a coin join, and they get to choose, I'm going to do a coin join for 3.64 BTC, and I'm going to do it right now, and I'm going to do it with 8 counterparties. And to get that privilege, they pay a little bit more in fees. And there's also a kind of inbuilt into Join Market is a kind of what we call a tumbler algorithm, which is basically doing a sort of a sequence or network of coin joins over time, and that's automated. So Join Market was started by Chris Belcher, who's over there, and he's going to be showing you Electrum Personal Server as well after me, I think, at the end. So yeah, that's basically it's coin join. So I'm assuming everyone knows what coin join is. Can you put your hand up if you don't know what coin join is? Wow. Okay. So this is where we're being stupid, right? So coin join is basically that instead of you just making a payment to someone else in a transaction, you cooperate with some other people, and they also are making a payment. But it's a separate payment to yours, and the key point is because of how Bitcoin is designed, those multiple separate payments can all be done together trustlessly. Like if I want to pay Mir 1 Bitcoin and Adam wants to pay Jonas 1 Bitcoin, we can cooperate to make that payment together at the same time without having to trust each other. So that's the short version of coin join. Yeah.
Wasabi is an open source, privacy-focused Bitcoin wallet, and it is using coin join. So generally, there are two main attack vectors of privacy. One is what happens on your network level, how you are establishing your wallet balance and getting to know about your unspent transaction outputs. And the other one is the blockchain level privacy, is that you want to do some mixing or some kind of obfuscating. I started this project 4 years ago, and the first 2 years I was only working on the network level privacy, because I realized that if I fail there, then it doesn't matter if I mix or not, because just gonna privacy is like security. It fails where it's the weakest. Without going into too much detail, we fixed the blockchain level privacy with client-side filtering architecture. We also provide you to be able to connect to your own full node and download the blocks from there. But we were very, very careful about how we are using the filters, so it's not the default way. It's like you are getting the filters from the server over Tor, and you are getting every block now over Tor from Bitcoin peers, and you are changing your Tor identity over the time too when you are getting the blocks, and when you are broadcasting the transactions, then you are changing your Tor identity every time too. So that's about the network level privacy. The coin join I'm not going to go into because Adam went into it in more details. In a nutshell, it's you select your coins, you click enqueue, and you wait until they get coin joined.
So the question would be, these coin joins work, but can we make them even better? And if you do these coin joins, they are transactions which have multiple payments in them, right? And what this means is also that there's a lot of duplicate cryptographic data in there, because these are multiple payments, so they do similar things. Now, what would happen if we could eliminate the duplicate data? And that would be that suddenly, because we can merge multiple payments into one, this transaction would be cheaper than if everybody would do the payment on their own. So now you would have an economic incentive to use CoinJoin. Maybe in the future every transaction could be a CoinJoin, or most of them. But in order to do that, we need some changes in the Bitcoin protocol itself. They are a little bit further out, but there are a few changes, I think, which aren't so far away, which is, for example, Schnorr signatures, which is a concept I've been working on. So they allow to express certain smart contracts in just a single signature. So even though a transaction enforces some kind of smart contract, it doesn't look like it would do that, because it's just a single signature. So for example, in Lightning, you're creating a coin that can be spent if both parties agree, both ends of the channel agree that they want to update this channel and spend this coin. Now, on the Bitcoin blockchain, it's very obvious that this is a smart contract which exactly enforces this 2 of 2 policy. Now, with Schnorr signatures, you can make it look like it would just be a normal payment, and no one could distinguish, is this a normal payment, or is this a channel opening, or is this some other kind of wallet feature, and so on. And these kinds of improvements, I think, would also help for scalability, because of course it's a transaction with just a single signature is smaller than a transaction having to provide multiple signatures in order to make the smart contract work.
Well, it's amazing. We are working to have a Bitcoin with transactions that are more confidential, private, but are there any risks for the user using this kind of tools?
Yeah, I just want to, that fits in perfectly. What I was thinking about what Jonas said is, I want to introduce the concept of a steganographic transaction. You know, like the idea is you can, if we do stuff like CoinJoin, which we do, and I think it's great personally, it's very public. You know, you're doing CoinJoin, it has certain trade-offs, and it's being chosen for privacy reasons. But if we can do things more like what Jonas was just describing, which can be high-tech stuff like Schnorr aggregation, but it can also be really kind of low-tech stuff like what's recently been described as pay-to-endpoint or pay-join, where you make transactions which are actually coin joins but don't look like coin joins. I won't go into details here. I want to get the general idea. The general idea is if we can have strategies where we create privacy in a way that shares the anonymity set of all ordinary transactions, then that's superb. And that's the example of opening a lightning channel with a Schnorr, so it doesn't look like a 2 of 2, or it could be a pay join where it's a coin join that just looks like an ordinary transaction. And there are several other ideas along these lines where we can build privacy in a more steganographic way, if I can put it like that. That could be great, and I could go on, but anyway.
So blacklisting is definitely a possibility because, as Adam said, anonymity is not unobservability, right? So anonymity is that you can verify that you have this privacy, and if you try to do steganographic transactions that's more about unobservability, you cannot verify that you have the privacy. I would say, because it's entirely possible that in the future exchanges starts to backlist coin joins and transactions those are trying to be anonymous, because it's very obvious which transactions are trying to do that and which transactions aren't. Now it's not happening right now, but it's possible, and that would be a terrible feature because we have the steganographic ideas, but I mean they are quite weak. I think it's you don't provide a really strong unobservability with that. So, well, you know, on the other hand, that Bitcoin is legal, so it's eating away the largest power of all the governments in the world, and they let this thing go. It's crazy. So you don't know.
For what it's worth, I have heard one anecdote. Obviously, I won't share details of a person telling me that they had to use something. Actually, I even forget the details, but I think it was involving a large amount, and exchanges get a lot more aggressive in wanting to know where the coins come from. In fact, I had a personal experience similar to that, where it was a relatively large amount of money, and they wanted to know the origins of the coins. So I just spent the previous 2 years making the origins of the coins impossible to find. So that was an interesting experience. But anyway.
Maybe one note on the risk of adding new cryptographic features to Bitcoin. So what we are working on right now actually doesn't require any new cryptographic assumptions in Bitcoin. And this is compared to some of the altcoins which have quite unstudied or relatively recent cryptographic assumptions. So we don't really increase the risk there by adding these features to Bitcoin. But on the other hand, some of these protocols they are a little bit more difficult to implement, let's say. This shouldn't be a concern for the user, but in general, if you do a protocol like that where you agree on a single signature, you need to talk to your peers a little bit more, and that's maybe a little bit more difficult to implement.
Yes, I think one of the key of these tools should be the fact that there is some kind of mass adoption, because right now, even for the fact you are using a tool like that, the regulators can imply in some way that you are a shady person trying to hide something. So I guess probably in the future, if these kind of tools are more used, could be a nice thing. What are your thoughts about?
It depends on which tool we're talking about, right? Because like a good concrete example is the example of using Schnorr for multi-sig. In that case, it doesn't look like something unusual. So there's that very important distinction between cases like what the coin join tools that we've built are very obviously coin join. There's absolutely no, so there's a big difference there.
So there are two ways to build technologies. Those are disrupting existing industries. One way is to use tools like build tools. Those are completely decentralized, peer-to-peer, like file sharing or Bitcoin or PGP. And the other ways is what you're referring to, is to get mass adoption as fast as we can. And examples are, for example, Uber or these file sharing economies that Airbnb got so big that they cannot shut it down anymore.
Mass adoption means also that it's easier to do things like that and even safer for everyone. So I'm kind of satisfied, but if you want to add something, this is your time. Nothing. So, please.
Yes, so I'd like to ask the other guys in the room that when will we have confidential transactions in Bitcoin?
I don't know.
2 weeks.
Maybe we should then, if you're interested in that, elaborate on what that is. So I think one of the big problems privacy-wise that Bitcoin has, or one among a few big problems privacy-wise, is that the transaction amounts are public in Bitcoin, and this makes things complicated. For example, in a coin join, if you do it in the naive way, like Alice wants to pay 2 Bitcoin, Bob wants to pay 3 Bitcoin, they do a coin join in the naive way, it's easy to look in the transaction and see which output belongs to which input because they have different amounts. Of course, this is not what their software is doing, this is the naive way. But problems with transactions amount are also present in other protocols. And there are ideas for how to hide transaction amounts without introducing additional cryptographic assumptions. And there are open source implementations of that, for example, in Blockstream's Elements and Liquid. It's called confidential transactions. Now the question is, how long does it take to get that into Bitcoin? It's a very different, it would look very differently, but I think the good thing about Bitcoin is that we have a lot of time. So I don't know, could take 20, 30 years, maybe 5, no one knows, I think. But there are also some principal concerns against this that Adam, for example, has written a blog post about, because if you don't see the transaction amounts, how can you be sure, for example, that there's only ever be 21 million Bitcoins? So right now you can just look at the chain and verify and add up the sums. That's not possible anymore if the amounts are hidden.
And what do you think about the idea that we introduce confidential transactions in a way that nodes can verify that how many coins go into confidential transaction outputs, not gonna come out more than that. So people who are afraid of the cryptographic risk or the implementation risks, you would use confidential transactions, but those who are not would not use.
Yeah, that's, I think it's going in the direction of an extension block, but yeah, I think that's probably one of the possible ways to do it.
So it's time for question.
what is your stance on the legal aspect of the whole thing? Where I'm headed with this question is, if we do have CoinJoin as an optional feature, I'm all in with the privacy aspect, but I don't want to answer the questions to the authorities, like why did you just flow your money through the CoinJoin, and if it's going to be sufficient for them, because they don't understand, right? They just say, well, why did you do it, and where's the money coming from? And similar questions may be asked by the exchanges, where they're saying, oh, you went with this bitcoins through the CoinJoin market, and basically we think the CoinJoin coins are dirty. And so what is your opinion on this? And second part, when we finally have CDs, same thing, if it's an optional feature, I could be blamed for entering with all my funds into the CT world where it's not visible, and I could be questioned why I did it.
So law is pretty much a pseudoscience today. There are very, very strong privacy laws and very, very strong anti-privacy laws. So if I ask you how much money do you have, you would be uncomfortable by that question. And if the strong anti-privacy laws win this space, then I don't have to ask you anymore, because I can just go to a block explorer and figure that out.
I think the best response is, if you're being asked that, why did you try to make the transaction look like something suspicious in order to hide the origins, would be because everyone does it. And also because maybe in the future it'll be cheaper to do it even, so you have good reasons to do it.
One, two. Yeah. Okay. Now. Yeah. Would it be possible to combine CoinJoin? I think yesterday or today somebody mentioned this ricochet. So you have different hops, and so blacklisting would be possible. And can you explain ricochet and paynims for example? Is it possible? So just to get an understanding what these terms mean and how they work.
I'll just say, and you can continue, I'm not an expert in either of those two, but Ricochet, as I understand it, is moving a transaction through several hops. In other words, doing several actual Bitcoin transactions to make a payment. And I'm dubious about its value, but I can certainly see why people do it, because they do it because there's this kind of completely broken chainalysis techniques going on, you know, for hops and what have you. So I really don't want to comment on that too much. I don't really want to comment too much on paynims either. Basically, it's well, I'll let the other guys.
So I don't answer your question either, but I'm just saying that, for example, Blockstream's blockchain analysis software considers self-spent whole output, considers whole output spent as self-spent. So against that, Ricochet would not mean anything, would not be effective at all, because it would recognize that it's self-spent. But on the other hand, with Wasabi, I'm always spending whole outputs like 80% of the time. So it's yeah, what is self-spent and what is spent to other people. So it can go both ways.
Yeah, agreed.
I've just realized that if you want to learn more about stealth addresses, then watch Block Digest, because we just had a 2-hour discussion, of which about 20 minutes was about the pros and cons of stealth addresses. So advert for Block Digest there.
Yeah, it was yesterday, so the last video.
Okay, thank you.
I heard a lot about these tainted coin things, though, when they try to make coins non-fungible, coins that are known bad for some reason. I don't really get why that could even be a problem. I mean, what keeps me from assuming I have a tainted coin? Just make a new wallet, send part of that coin to the new wallet and do that process 3 times over, 4 times over, 5 times over, and then spend them. Why is there any way to prevent that?
No, it's, well, you could say it's not block space efficient, but what you're saying that we can just spend it to ourselves 5 times, and that would make it non-blacklisted Bitcoin possible. Okay, then they say, okay, let's do it. Let's go look at 5 hops. Okay, I do another hop. No, let's look at 6 hops. It's like, you know, this is why blockchain analysis is like a probabilistic science, right? And it depends on the people who are writing the software. That a lot of parameters are like, well, it can go both ways. They can consider it this way or this way, and then they start to consider it this way. Then we are privacy researchers are doing something else, and then they start to consider. Yeah, it's.
So
it's kind of a pseudoscience too.
It's just a heuristic by which they decide the exchanges or so. It's just heuristically decided that this is probably still somewhat tainted, and that dilutes over time, and they will adjust the parameters. So it's not hard.
Could I just give an anecdote? I mean, maybe it will help you sort of see what's going on here. A couple of years back, there was a darknet market, I think, called Sheep Market. And as usual, there was an exit scam, and they stole basically the operators of the site stole all the coins. And what did they do? They just started what's called a peeling chain. They just started sending it to another address, and they're sending some of that to another address, and there's huge chains of transactions. And there were people like on Reddit, literally like chasing them on the blockchain. They were trying to, oh, they're going there next, they're going there, and they were trying to keep up to see where the coins were going. And in the end, it's just a fool's errand. You can't. I mean, it is somewhat pseudoscience. That's not to say that there isn't real science in blockchain analysis, but it's pseudoscience in that sense that people think it's about perfectly tracing where all the coins are. No, you can't perfectly trace it. It's ridiculous. So I'm just giving you that example. So I'm agreeing with you. Yeah, I mean, tainted coins is a very dubious concept. They can try to enforce it, but it's almost impossible.
So a question about overlap between what we are discussing and the buzzword of this today's Lightning Network. So Jonas before said plausible deniability will be granted by things that are more private and even cheaper. So if they ask you why we are doing that, it's not because I want to hide something, but because it's cheaper. So maybe in the future, coin join, which is not signature aggregation. But even right now, you can just say that you're using Lightning Network, and Adam Gibson were suggesting to do it. But right now, most people using Lightning Network with exposing IP address directly, and they're also using it in a way that promotes a very static representation of the node. For example, during the Lightning Network torch passages, of course, there were Twitter identities associated with the torch, and some people were scared to move the torch to Iran because that was basically something illegal. Then eventually somebody luckily did and didn't care. But what are your thoughts about the overlap? So is it right now a danger or just a net positive or what?
I think right now it's definitely a danger. So because you can go to a Lightning Block Explorer, enter a domain, and see all the coins they have in channels. So that's right now a problem. I think the main problem there is probably that the defaults for how to use the Lightning Network are not really sensible at the moment for end users. Maybe end users shouldn't by default open public channels, but rather private channels, which are not announced to the whole network.
Okay, that's all, folks. It's time for the lunch. Thank you again for this panel.